Good morning and welcome to the Daily Light Devotion. I hope all of you have had a wonderful Friday yesterday and looking forward to today, that is the 29th of August. Today we're going to see Psalms 139, 140, and 141 in the Old Testament, seeing Jesus through these Psalms. And in the New Testament, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 13. The theme for these three psalms, that is 139 to 141, is to known by God, guarded in holiness, and faithful in temptation. So these three psalms take us into the heart of our relationship with God. Psalms 139 reminds us that God knows us completely. Psalms 140 reminds us that God is our protector when we face evil. And Psalms 141 teaches us to guard our hearts, words, and actions. And 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 13 gives us a serious warning from history of Israel. So Psalms 139 begins with a powerful truth that God knows us. He knows when we sit down, when we rise up. He knows our thoughts. He knows our words before we speak them. There is nowhere we can go where God's presence is absent. David asks, "Where can I go from your spirit?" Whether he goes to heaven or goes to the depths, God is there. This is both confronting and challenging. It is confronting because we are never alone, but it is challenging because we cannot hide our lives from God. Jesus knows us completely. He knows our weakness, our struggles, our thoughts, our desires. Yet He does not simply expose us, He invites us into a relationship with Him. The gospel tells us that Jesus came to save people who could never hide their needs for God or their need for God. Because God knows us completely and still loves us, we can completely be honest before Him and allow Him to transform us. Psalms 139 verses 23 and 24 says, "Search my heart." You know, near the end of the psalm, David prays, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." This is a powerful prayer. David is not asking God merely to examine his outward behavior. He's asking God to examine his heart. Why? Because our outward actions often begin with what is happening inside. And before sin comes or anything comes as an action, it can begin as a thought, desire, attitude, or hidden compromise. David therefore asked God to reveal anything, right, uh, that is there in his heart, that is happening inside, um, uh, that is not pleasing to God. Jesus does not only want to change our behavior, He wants our transformation of our hearts. A kingdom life begins before inside and works its way outside. So that is what we need to really understand. And for us, it's very practical for us to check and pray this prayer, "Oh Lord, search my heart." That is, search whatever is inside me. Psalms 140 says, God is our protector. It says it's a prayer of protection from evil and destructive plans. David recognizes the evil is real. He does not pretend that everything is safe. Instead, he brings his situation before God. He asks God to protect him and ultimately declare that Lord is his God. This teaches us that something important. We do not have to fight every battle, or we don't have to fight any battle in our own strength. We can bring our battles to God. Jesus also taught his disciples to pray, um, "Deliver us from the evil one." Jesus does not teach us to live in fear, he teaches us to depend on the Father. And when we face evil, opposition, or spiritual attacks, our first response should be dependence on God rather than confidence in ourselves. Psalms 141 says, "Guard my heart and my mouth." It continuously is another important prayer. It says, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth." David understands that the words matter. Our mouths can bless, our mouths can encourage, but our mouths can also curse, wound, destroy, and create conflict. So David therefore asks God to help him control what he says. He also asks God to guard his heart from being drawn towards evil. This connects beautifully with the other passages. God knows our heart, God protects us from evil, and he must and we must cooperate with him by guarding what we allow in our hearts and what comes out of our mouth. Jesus taught that what comes out from our mouth reveals what is in our hearts. So following Jesus means for allowing him to transform not only our behavior but also our inner life. If we want kingdom words to come out of our mouth, we must allow the King to shape our what is happening in our hearts. Moving over to First Corinthians, uh, chapter 10, verses 1 to 13. We look at 1 to 5 first. It says about a spiritual experience is not enough. Paul now points Corinthians back to Israel. The Israelites experienced extraordinary things. They were under the cloud, they passed through the sea, they experienced God's provision. They ate spiritual food and drank spiritual drinks. They had powerful spiritual experience. Yet Paul says that many of them were not pleasing to God because they continued in disobedience. This gives us a serious warning. Experiencing God's blessing does not automatically mean we are walking in obedience to God. We can know God, we can attend church, we can experience God's presence, we can see God's answers, but we still need to choose obedience. Jesus does not call us merely to experience Him, He calls us to follow Him, to know Him, right? And the kingdom citizenship is not simply about what we have experienced, it's about how we live after that experience. So, spiritual experience must produce spiritual obedience. Verses 6 to 12 in chapter 10, Paul says these things happened as examples for us. The Israelites desired evil things. They fell into idolatry. They committed sexual immorality. They tested the Lord. They complained. Paul says, let who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So this is a call for humility. We should never think that could never happen to me. Instead, we should recognize our dependence upon God. The enemy often uses pride to make people careless. Jesus demonstrated perfect dependence upon the Father. When he was tempted in the wilderness, he stood firmly upon God's word. He did not trust his human strength, he trusted the Father. The safest place for a believer is not self confidence, but be humble dependence upon God. Verse 13 says, then Paul gives us one of the most encouraging promises. God is faithful. The temptation will come, but being tempted does not mean that God has abandoned us. But God's promise that the temptation will not be beyond what we can bear, and and He will provide a way to escape. And we need to notice the foundation of the promise. Not I'm strong, not I will never be tempted, but God is faithful, right? And our victory begins with his faithfulness. Jesus himself was tempted, yet he remained without sin. Because Jesus, we can approach God for help when we struggle. We do not have to surrender to temptation. This is always a God provided response. Sometimes that means fleeing, sometimes praying, sometimes speaking God's word, sometimes seeking accountability, and sometimes simply walking away from the situation. So when temptation comes, don't focus on the first how strong we are. Remember how faithful God is. So there's a lovely progression here again. We can see Psalms 139. God knows me. He knows my heart. He knows my weakness. He knows my thoughts. He knows my desires. 140, God protects me. I can depend upon Him when I face evil. Psalms 141, I must guard my heart. I need God's help to control my words, desires, and actions. And 1 Corinthians 10:13, God is faithful even in my temptation. I can trust Him and take a way to escape the escape He provides. So the progression is known, protected, guarded, warned, and strengthened. So thank you for that, and I thank you for watching the video. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.